So first speaker I'm going to introduce is Maurice Mcleod. Maurice is a Labour councillor and a leading member of the Socialist Health Association. Give it up for Maurice.
Hello. I feel like the president. This is great. Hello, everyone. I'm really honoured to speak in front of you today. I'm not a health expert, and so it's quite daunting standing in front of a bunch of people who are. So I'm going to go personal, I guess, rather than try to be an expert. So the NHS is part of my life long before I was born. It was the NHS who called to my mum and convinced her to leave her home in Jamaica and come to Britain in 1964. She then worked as a nurse for 40 years at St Stephen's and Charing Cross hospitals and as a district nurse in Wandsworth. Shout out. My mum was a card-carrying member of NUPE and is still immensely proud of her nursing career. My siblings and I joke about how quickly she manages to bring up the fact that she was a nurse whenever she's with any new person in authority. The NHS gave my mum status in a land far from her home, a never-ending entourage of friends and an encyclopedic knowledge of medical treatments. There was a dark side to the job though. Despite long hours of work, the stress and strain that my mum felt, my mum's final salary as a nurse was the same as my starting salary as a journalist. I can't remember a time when mum wasn't working, and she was frugal by default because of her Jamaican upbringing, but we always seemed to have just about enough money to get by. We didn't go on holidays, presents were notional, not actual. We didn't have the coolest clothes, but we always had food on the table and a roof over our heads. Through the years, I met countless numbers of her friends from work. For some reason, they all seem to be Black, Asian, or Irish. And it's true now as it's ever been, the NHS would not exist without workers from abroad. So when I hear politicians like Nigel Farage and anyone else saying there are far too many people from overseas working for our NHS, I hear the dog whistle. It's pandering to the people who used to make my mum's life hell. The people who wouldn't allow her in their homes to give them care or would wipe down any object she touched. It's playing to the old lady who spat in my mum's face rather than be treated by a darkie. My mum didn't tell me about all this stuff when she came home. She washed her hands, washed her face, starch ironed her uniform ready for the next shift. Being both proud of the health service while being unhappy with the way staff are treated is nothing new. While the government had us out clapping for health workers, they were effectively cutting their pay and leaving nurses needing to use food banks. Then they cut funding for nurse training and wonder why we have 40,000 nurse vacancies and increasing waiting times for ambulances and A&E. Health workers are not just fighting for their own pay, they're fighting to save the health service for us all. It's why I take every opportunity to support staff when they demand pay and conditions. It's why I've worked tirelessly to stop outsourcing at my local hospital, St George's, which has contracted out some of its non-medical roles, such as security guards, to a company which doesn't pay them well, restricts sickness pay, even during a pandemic where 2 of them died, and doesn't give them guaranteed working hours. Some in my party think being public in our criticism of the local health trust is not the way that a government in waiting should behave. But I am absolutely certain, as a Labour politician, as a socialist politician, being unshakable in my support for all workers is not just my right, it's my duty. I often appear on right-wing media platforms like LBC. Commentators will say things like, when has socialism ever worked? I point to the NHS. That's what we built. Devised by socialists, staffed by people from all over the world, loved by all. My mum and her generation came to save the NHS when it was newborn. Now it's 75. It's our duty to save it and help turn it into the service our people need it to be. We need our healthcare to be free at the point of use, adequately funded out of general taxation, and provided by public bodies which treat staff well and pay them properly. Very simple. Join a union, join a picket line, write to your councillors, MPs, GLA members, remind them that it's their duty to defend our NHS. Oh, and solidarity with the RCN nurses and everyone else working in our health service. Thank you.
Thanks so much to Maurice for that fantastic opening contribution and for sharing your mum's stories. Oh, your mum sounds like a legend, by the way. Can we meet her?